Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me for the Unit 3 exam review. I'll go ahead and cover this maybe in about 30 minutes or so, maybe 40 minutes, and then I'll start working through one of the practice cases on page 9. We finished the first one in class. Either you did it today in the Monday lecture, or on Wednesday you'll get a chance to do those. I'll do the left one, the respiratory infection with influenza, and then that should set you up to do the GI track as like a practice. If you do have questions on that one, you can just email me with questions, or like if you want me to double check what answers you have on there. So over here, like I said, over here I'll go over the first line, second line, and third line defense, which is primarily what's gonna be on a majority of your exam. And then, like I mentioned, I'll work through the practice cases. A couple details. So remember that the exam is I'll give you online via Respondus, and you will be able to take this starting Wednesday at 6 p.m. and you'll have until Saturday night at 11 p.m. to finish it. Friendly reminder that if you are having an issue with your device or it's slow or you might not have good internet or a good environment at home to take it, then you're still able to take the exam Thursday, Friday on campus, either at the library or just in one of the quiet rooms in the library itself, or other places on campus. But ideally, someplace quiet where you can focus, not have a lot of distractions, and get the exam done. It is a little bit different because we're doing it online, but it's not any easier or harder than the other ones. It's the same exam you would have been given this week, but we did push it back just so we can get the lab stuff done this week. And it will be audio webcam enabled, so make sure you do your sweep when Respondus asks for it. Things that we do look for with this one, if you have any like weird motions or you're not looking at the camera or you have noises, it kind of does like a check, like a sanity check for us. And at the end of the exam, essentially what happens is we get like a roster of everyone that took the exam, and it shows like green, yellow, orange, red, or something like that.
Okay.
Essentially, anyone that is one of those red or orange colors, we have to go back and give me one second. I'm going to mute somebody. Oh, muted. Perfect. Basically, what happens is anyone that's in one of the other colors, the reds, the oranges, the yellows, Dr. Cotter goes back and watches the video. And if anything looks abnormal, she might ask you about it, kind of figure out why you either were looking away too long or looking down, etc. So it does record you, and it does give us a flag of anybody that is suspect for the exam. So just be careful, pay attention to the exam. Other than that, that's really all I had for details and little hints. Okay, so like I said, the primary part of this entire unit is the immune system. So the first part of the immune system is the first line of defense. Those are your physical and chemical barriers. That is there to prevent microbes from getting into the body. So that's the first layer of protection. The way I broke it down in front of you is between physical and chemical barriers. You'll see in the practice cases kind of how a question on the exam could be phrased. But the reason I broke it down like this is I want you to notice that there's a lot of similarities between these. Today in lecture, when Dr. Cotter had everyone go up to the whiteboard and start putting in, one cell or one process or one chemical. It seemed like a lot of people panicked on that one. But I think if you recall, that was the exact same question that was on the chapter 16 and 17 case study. And a lot of these lines of defense are what we call non-specific, so they're very common between different locations in the body. So, for example, for your physical barriers, you have your on the skin, you have your epidermis and your dermis. Most likely, your exam or your microbe is going to infect either the respiratory tract, the GI tract, or the reproductive tract. And the reason I want you to highlight those is because if you look at the physical barriers, they all have mucous membranes. They all have mucus. So that's like two potential physical barriers you could write down if you have see a question like this on the exam, whether they say the infection in the respiratory tract or the GI tract or reproductive tract. Mucus and mucous membranes should be, option one and two for you. And then you have a few more specific ones like cilia. Again, that's a respiratory tract and reproductive tract. But then in the respiratory tract, you have things like coughing and sneezing to kick out microbes. And the GI tract, you have vomiting and diarrhea to push the microbes out of the body once they've gotten into the GI tract. But for the most part, they're very similar. For chemicals on the skin, you have your acidic pH, you have your salts, and your basically your oils, your sebum. Respiratory tract has lysozymes and lactoferrins. In the eyes, you have lacrimation or your tears. And then in the GI tract, you have mucus and saliva, hydrochloric acid, bile and enzymes, and gastroferritins. And then reproductive tract again has mucus, has the acidic pH, and has the lactoferrins. Again, you'll see it how it's going to kind of be worded in the practice cases, but for the most part, what I would tell you to do is practice or study, two physical barriers for reproductive and two chemical barriers, two physical barriers for GI tract and two chemical barriers, and then two physical barriers for reproductive and two chemical barriers for reproductive. Again, I've never seen her ask anything about the eyes. That's very specific, and there's not a lot there. And then the skin, you can be asked like, what is the physical barrier on the skin? But as far as the practice cases, I've never seen her ask anything about the skin. So keep that in mind. Resident microbes. I have seen people miss this question a lot on the previous exams. Um, You might be asked, hey, what is one resident microbe in this location? So let's use our big three, like I mentioned. So in the vagina, you've got things like Candida albicans or Lactobacillus species. In the respiratory tract, which I'm seeing it's not even in here. I guess you can use your nose. You got Staph aureus, Staph epidermidis, and then the large intestine or in the intestines or the GI tract. That's typically your Escherichia coli and your Klebsiella species. But essentially, she'll ask for one resident microbe, and then she might ask why are resident microbes important? And remember that they help block attachment to pathogens. They also help compete for nutrients and resources, and they also secrete their own antibiotics that inhibits the microbial growth of foreign microbes. Again, not a big deal, not a very complicated one, but definitely one that I've seen people miss too often on this exam. Okay, so second line of defense. This is from page 14 of your handout. Um, Again, this is more of a question that Dr. Cotter asked today in class. Um, Remember that no matter what infection we give you, whether I tell you it's the alien virus on the moon, it's not going to matter what virus or what bacteria we give you. When she asks you what two second line defense or two second line cells are involved in every immune response, it should be neutrophils and macrophages. I also see this missed on the exams. Again, too many times. It doesn't matter what scenario we give you. You should be writing down macrophages, neutrophils every time. The only time you'll add anything additional would be if it's a location-based infection. So things like basophils and mast cells for your allergic responses. Or if she says the word parasite anywhere, then you should also include eosinophils. So macrophages, neutrophils, eosinophils. Um, when she gives you the second line defense, she might say like, "Hey, give me one second line defense cell." Let's say neutrophils, for example. Then the next question could ask you, "What is the chemicals that are secreted by neutrophils?" That'll be digestive enzymes. And then the third question could be, "What process do those chemicals are those chemicals a part of?" And that would be phagocytosis. Same thing you saw today on the whiteboard on Monday. Wednesday, you'll see this on Wednesday. But ideally, you're trying to piece together, okay, if I have this cell, it's going to release this chemical that's going to perform this function or this process. Again, even eosinophils for parasites, they still secrete digestive enzymes. They're still part of the phagocytosis process. And the other thing that's different is your basophils and mast cells that they release histamine and they induce vasodilation and involved in inflammation. The biggest one here is macrophage. So if you message me this weekend for help on the chapter 15 or 16, 17 case study, I told you to list every chemical that macrophages are involved in, not just one or two. The reason for that is macrophages do a lot in the body. And you can be asked, if I say if you have digestive enzymes, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and all the complement proteins, you can be asked any one of these, and you should be able to identify which process it is involved in. And again, we get a chance to practice this during the case studies. Yeah, Malika, what's going on? You can,
Hey. Yeah, I asked a question about that, and I remember that you said that I have to mention all of the things that is produced by macrophages,
y-
basically. And I
yes.
saw in my study case interleukin 1 and 6, sorry.
Mhm.
But I was confused about complement proteins later.
Okay.
I didn't know if I should include those because I see that they're in the same section there. So
Yeah.
during the exam, yeah,
Oh no.
sorry.
Sorry. No, go ahead and finish your question.
So I was wondering, like, if during the exam I will be asked, like, let's say I'll have like four options, interleukin 1 and 6, and then I'll have complement proteins as well. So do I include that for macrophages as well, that they produce complement proteins as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. So it depends on the question. So the one of the ways Dr. Carter could ask is, hey, give me two chemicals that are released or secreted by macrophages. And if she does that, you can kind of pick the two that you want to remember or pick. I've also seen it as a select all that apply, and she might give you a list of chemicals, um, including, and some of those could be second line chemicals, and some of those could be third line chemicals. And then you have to go and select everything that, for example, macrophage is involved in. So in that instance, you would select digestive enzymes, interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and either she'll have just a statement that says complement proteins, or she might have a few of the complement proteins written out. But yeah, if the question's asking you like a select all that apply and you see the complement proteins for macrophage, I would select all the complement proteins you see on this list.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, of course, good question. Um, okay, and then next I'll go to the third line of defense. This is going to be, for the most part, first and second line. They are they're non-specific. So no matter what microbe we give you, for the most part, your answers should be the same for first line physical barriers, first line chemical barriers, second line immune cells, second line chemicals, and second line processes. Again, just don't overthink it. Again, these are non-specific. So no matter what infection I have, I'm going to have the same reaction in terms of the first line defense and second line defense. Where you're going to make or break your exam is going to be the third line of defense. And I saw, as you guys try to answer those today, I did see some confusion on the pieces. You guys were saying a lot of the correct terminology, but you weren't putting it in the right location, if that makes sense. So, third line of defense is a direct response to an infection. It is a specific response to an infection. Um, so the way the body determines this is by determining whether the infection is inside of our cells or the infection is outside of our cells, like in our dermis or our blood vessels, or in some of our external organs or external systems, like the respiratory system, the GI tract, and the reproductive system. So if she's giving you an example that says this is a virus or this is a cancer, and really most likely it's going to be a virus, then you are in what they call an intracellular or a cell-mediated response because you are number one. So keep this number one in mind. So the macrophages are going to report to the Th1 CD4 plus helper T cell using the CD4 plus receptor. The Th1 helper T cell will then activate CD8 cytotoxic T cells and memory T cells. Those T cells will then use T cell receptors or TCRs to screen the other cells, kind of like TSA checking your passport. And then cytotoxic T cells will destroy virally infected cells using perforins and granzymes. Now, it's like I'll say four bullet points here, but this would, you kind of see how many points you could get. So you can get, selecting Th1 uh, versus Th2. Also saying that the helper T cell is a CD4 cell, not a CD8 cell. Um, Describing that the Th1 helper T cells will call on the CD8 cytotoxic T cells and memory T cells versus plasma B cells and memory B cells. Talking about the T cell receptor, because you're using T cells, versus the plasma B cells and memory B cells, which use a B cell receptor for look for microbes. And then the difference between cytotoxic T cells and antibodies is that cytotoxic T cells do kill or destroy infected cells, whereas antibodies do not destroy or kill anything. They are just involved in these four processes, which I should have on the next slide. And then the other thing is to know your antibody types. We've covered four major antibodies. IgM, which is the first antibody that's always made, and it's the biggest, but it can't go everywhere. You have IgG, which can is the second antibody and is able to travel anywhere, including across the placenta. You have IgA, which is involved in mucosal infections. And when we say mucosal infections, think of anything that has a mucous membrane, the respiratory tract, the GI tract, and the reproductive system. They all have mucous membranes, so if you have to select three antibodies, IgA should be selected for each of these systems. And then the last one is IgE, which is involved in allergies. And if IgE is made, IgG is not made. So that's something that I saw on the previous case study as well, is the body's incorrect response when it has an allergy is to produce IgE instead of IgG. Um, but other than that, you will produce IgG instead of IgE. So IgM produced first, IgG always produced second, unless you have an allergy. Then IgE is produced instead, and then IgA for anything that has a mucous membrane. Does anyone have any question about the third line defense? Only because it's one of the I think this is the one that's going to get the most students because if you don't know the difference between the Th1 and Th2, and then know that Th1 is involved with the cytotoxic T cells and Th2 is involved with the B cells, that's kind of where most people will miss a large chunk of their points. And you'll see why when I present the practice cases. Okay, so I guess I'll go ahead and get started with the practice cases. So this is like an example case, and then the next one I have is going over the one on the left side of page 9. So this is 5 questions here. So the first thing you should look at when you read the question is where is your infection located and what is causing it? So the example I used is bacterial infection in the vaginal canal, which is very similar to the number 9 question, or sorry, the middle practice example on question 9, talking about extracellular gram-negative bacterial infection. So the first thing you want to do is, okay, I have a bacterial infection, vaginal canal. So first thing you do, list your physical and chemical first line barriers. So for physical barriers, I have the mucous membranes, the mucus, and I have cilia. And then chemicals in this area, I have lysozymes, acidic pH, and lactoferrins. What I'm going to tell you is try to at least memorize two of them. Um, Don't leave any of these questions blank. Just give yourself the best chance. Most of these will have mucus and mucous membranes, and then you can, if you're missing the third piece, at least you get two of the three correct on that one. Once you determine your first line chemicals and physical barriers, you'll then look at, hey, do I have any resident microbes in the area? Again, go to this page on your Unit 1 handout, or sorry, Unit 3 handout. I think it's like page 3 or 4. And just remember two of these. Anything that's in your nose should be pretty easy. Staph aureus, Staph epidermidis. Large intestines, I would personally go with like E. coli and Klebsiella species, but you can also do like Streptococcus species, Enterococcus, etc. And then the vagina, I would remember Candida albicans. That's a very popular one. And then one of the lactobacillus species like acidophilus. So that's what I picked here. So pick a resident microbe. Most likely she'll only ask one, but have two just in case. And then for the next part of the question, list what second line cells, chemicals, and processes are involved for this specific infection. So, like I mentioned, every infection that occurs will always have macrophages and neutrophils. Macrophages and neutrophils release digestive enzymes, and then macrophages also release interleukin 1, interleukin 6, and then the complements C3b, C3a, and 5a, and then C5 through C9. And then the processes involved for all those chemicals are phagocytosis, fever, inflammation, and the MAC attack. And then lastly, ask yourself, is this an infection inside or outside of your cells? So is it a virus or is it anything else? If it's a virus, it's Th1. If it's anything else or outside the body, or sorry, outside the cells, they call it extracellular, or I think the other term I had was humoral response. And that's going to involve the Th2 CD4 plus helper T cell, then your plasma memory B cells, and then your antibodies IgM, IgG, and IgA. I listed all this stuff in, really four questions here. But if you want to break down how the question could be phrased on the exam, this physical list of two physical barriers, that is one question. List two chemical barriers, that is a second question. List a resident microbe, that's a third question. List your second line cells involved, that's a fourth question. List your chemicals, that's a fifth question. List your processes, that's a sixth question. And then it might ask you what type of third line cells are involved. So let's say Th2 helper T cells, that's seven. Plasma B and memory B cells are eight. Antibodies are nine. So that's like nine questions on this exam that are strictly related to this one case for bacterial infections in the vaginal canal. And say these are all worth, let's say 2 points, 2 points, 1 point, that's five, six, seven. Let's say this is worth 2 points, that's nine, 10, 11. You're probably looking at somewhere along the lines of maybe 12 to 15 points on just this one question alone. That's why I kind of want you to all figure to kind of focus on this chunk. The other things like definitely important because it's on the study guide, like the hypersensitivities, some of the blood type stuff. You are going to have some questions on that. But if that's like the last thing you study and you study just first line, second line, third line immune cells and kind of how all that stuff works, you'll pass the exam just fine. Those other questions will get you that high A or 100%, but not knowing this stuff is going to have you fail the exam just right off the bat. But hopefully this kind of makes sense the way I broke it down, how you should piece it together in your head, practice it for yourself, write note cards, whatever you might need so that this process makes sense. Okay, so for you all, you can go to page 9 of your study guide. Um, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this next one here. And it's basically related to the influenza virus respiratory infection on page 9. And you'll kind of see what you can list out for the answers, and I'll just walk them through with you. So your patient comes in and is complaining about fever, chills, headache, and has been coughing and sneezing since yesterday. You take a throat culture, and the lab returns the presence of influenza. So back to our little how to tackle the case study. Question 1, where is your infection and what is causing it? So your infection is influenza. That is a virus, and it is in the respiratory tract. So that should tell you it is inside the cell. So line 2, list your second line chemicals and physical barriers. And again, that's the first part on page 9. So list your first line physical barriers. We've got mucous membranes, you got mucus, you got cilia, and they kind of already gave you one, but coughing and sneezing as well. Question 2, you have first line chemical barriers. That includes your lysozymes and your lactoferrins. Um, Question number 3, what are your residents in this area? You can select something like Staph aureus, Staph epidermidis. You could also have things like Streptococcus pneumoniae or Corynebacterium. Again, pick two that you're going to remember just in case you get asked this question. Okay, the fourth part of this. So what are your second line non-specific cells? So you're going to have macrophages and neutrophils. Again, they're involved in every response. They should be in every single one of your answers. Please do not leave these two off. The question could even ask you what second line cells are involved in every immune response. Macrophages, neutrophils. You also will have mast cells involved because they are in our tissue. Because it didn't really specify where in the respiratory tract, so you might have mast cells involved. What second line chemicals and processes are involved? Again, that goes down to digestive enzymes and C3b. Those are involved in phagocytosis. You have interleukin 1, which is involved with fever. You've got C5 through C9, which is involved in the MAC attack. And then you also have histamine from the mast cells, and then C3a, C5a, and interleukin 6 involved in inflammation. And that should take you down, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the first 5 blocks of page 9. And then the last question we'll ask you, is this infection inside or outside of your cells? So virus inside the cell will be intracellular or a cell-mediated response. So you're going to have Th1 helper T cell, and that is going to use your CD4 plus receptor and your T cell receptor. Um, I'm going to guarantee that you're going to have a question on what receptors are involved. Just know if you're using either the Th1 or the Th2 helper T cells, those use a CD4 plus receptor and a T cell receptor. And it kind of goes back to this one. So CD4 plus, that is a T cell receptor, and a CD4 plus receptor, and then a T cell receptor. And then next after this, because this is a Th1 response, the cytotoxic T cells and memory T cells will be activated, and they will use perforins and granzymes to attack the cell, the virally infected cell, to kill it. And that answers everything for respiratory infection with influenza virus on page 9. What I'm gonna do for everyone that is in the group here, um, I'm gonna send you basically the answers that are on my page. That way, if you miss anything or you couldn't hear it, if I said something properly, you can write it all down. Um, but does that kind of make sense how the case studies on the exam should be worded or will be worded?
Yeah, it definitely does. Thank you, Reese.
Okay, perfect. And then for those that joined a little bit later, again, just watch the recording, and I'll cover the first big chunks of that. So that's really it for this one. If you haven't done so already and you want to practice, go ahead and do page 9, the GI tract infection with parasitic worm. Or if you've already done it and you want me to just quickly take a look at it to see if you got it right or not, just let me know, and I'll gladly review it. But again, biggest thing for this one is a lot of this stuff, especially in the first and second line, are very similar. Worst case, if you just don't know or you're just not sure, if it says first line barrier, just put mucus and mucous membranes. Like, just write it out. It doesn't matter. Write it out, get partial credit. Same thing for second line cells. You should always have macrophages and neutrophils every single time. And then yeah, if you miss the mast cell or if you miss the eosinophil, okay, you at least get partial credit versus missing all credit on the exams. But the one that you really do need to study and make sure that you understand is it intracellular? This one kind of right here. Is it intracellular, i.e., the Th1 response, or is it extracellular, i.e., the Th2 B cell response, or intracellular Th1 T cell response? That's really all I had for you all. Does anyone have any last minute questions or anything they would like to add or ask? Um, if you do, you can throw it in the chat. You can say it out loud, or if you just don't want to say it in a group, just message me. I'll be online for a little bit. Oh, yeah, Malika, go for it.
Thank you. I know that in our study case, she specified that it was um, outside of the cell. I
Hmm.
wondered during the exam, let's say if it will be not influenza but something else, how would we know like if that's an extracellular or intracellular, or will it be specified, or we will have to actually like figure it out ourselves? Because if
Yeah.
we won't be familiar with what is causing that, you know. I don't know if I formulated my question right.
No, you did. I understand what you're saying. So you're not gonna, she may not specifically gave you extracellular versus intracellular. What I'll tell you is if you see the word virus, that is intracellular. And we've only really talked about two viruses, influenza and HIV. But if she says virus or cancer, I've never seen her say cancer, but technically cancer too. If it's virus, it's intracellular. If it's anything else, bacteria, fungi, parasites, um, protozoan, whatever, that's all extracellular. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. So it's
Very
basically it's virus or everything else. And for virus, you know specifically it's Th1. For everything else, it's all Th2. So don't get confused with that one too.
Yeah, because it's all linked basically based on like it all depends if it's intracellular or extracellular, and
Hmm.
then the rest can be answered according to that. And I was just wondering, uh, how would I differentiate?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And like I said, you wouldn't necessarily know. Uh, like I said, sometimes she gives it like it's an extracellular bacterial infection, but all bacterial infections are extracellular because they don't go into our cells. So it's just virus intracellular. Everything else will be extracellular slash Th2 slash B cell response.
We got it. Thank you very much, Luis.
Yep, of course. Okay, any other questions? That's a good question. Any other questions? Okay, if I don't have anything else, thank you very much for taking the time tonight to just do this with me. I'll have one more exam review for the final probably next week. Still trying to figure out when I'm going to do it, but I'll do it next week before you meet for the final in 2 weeks. And then last thing is I'll be sending out essentially like a survey to both the Monday and Wednesday group. I like to bake something for all my classes at the end of the semester. I just need to know if you all have any kind of allergies things like that. That way I can start buying materials and making it. You'll have the treats on exam day, so you'll be able to grab one on your way out as like a thank you and thanks for being my last two Bio 205 classes. Other than that, thank you very much and enjoy your night. I will see Wednesday group on Wednesday and then Monday group. Make sure you get those infographics completed by 9 p.m. so that Dr. Cotter can go ahead and print those off. Have a good rest of your night, everyone. Thank you.